Hi there. I have Matthew Miller here with me today, and Matthew is a distinguished engineer at Red Hat, and he's also the Fedora project leader, which is one of the most used Linux distributions out there. And Matthew, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a Sunday, and we're here recording the interview. And welcome. And first question is, what's exactly a distinguished engineer? Can you help our listeners understand a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. This is a perfectly good way to be spending my Sunday afternoon. Um, so yeah, a distinguished engineer is a fairly high level individual contributor title at a lot of technology companies. And it is basically when you go, you might start as a junior associate engineer and then work up to engineer, senior engineer, principal engineer, senior principal engineer, and then distinguished engineer is the lofty tier above that. I say with some humility. I'm in really good company of some amazing people who have done, uh, written fundamental parts of the Linux operating system and done a lot of huge accomplishments at Red Hat. And just kind of in the world of open source. So it's a fairly small group of just out of all of the engineers who work at Red Hat, a few of us get to be distinguished engineers, and as part of that, it's part of our job to do things that reach across the company and have big impact and kind of influence the direction, from a technology point of view of the whole company, and this provides strategic input from the engineering side into what's going on for the whole company.
And Matthew, how did you get into computers? Was it still as a child or a little bit late in life? Or how
Yeah,
did you get into computing in general?
I was always intrigued by them when I was little. So, full disclosure, yeah, I was born in the 70s. So I was a kid growing up in the 80s as personal computers started coming in, and my family was poor. We lived in a neighborhood that was not wealthy, and we had a neighborhood school that so we couldn't afford a computer. But the school, through whatever program, they had every classroom got two Apple II computers that were in the hallway outside the classroom. And so, there was sometimes we would use them, like you get time, you could, like, when there was free time, you could go during class to go, or if you got your work done early. But I was very intrigued by those, and particularly, there was stacks of books next to them that were how to learn to program. It was, learn AppleSoft Basic programming. There, it was just basically you could teach yourself to program, and I was excited by that. And I just had this idea of, I could make these things. I could make this computer do what I want. And this is crazy to me today because I can't imagine doing this. But as a kid in third grade, fourth grade, I would actually get up an hour early, walk to school, and the janitor would let me in, and I would go and play on those computers in the hallway and work through those programming books and entering the exercises and learning all the ifs and thens and go tos and things from basic back in the day. So that's kind of how I really got started with things, just because I had that opportunity in school, and I don't know, like it really was attractive to me, so I put in the work, I guess.
It's amazing how the Apple IIc and the Commodore 64 and Tandy color computers were
Yeah,
important back then, and how many people started by learning to those computers, right?
yeah, and I guess there's kind of two things that I think are really special about them. The first one is, if you didn't have, back then there were no hard drives, or not on personal computers. It had a floppy drive, but if you booted it up and didn't have a floppy in there, it would actually come right up to the basic programming language prompt, a place for you to write programs for it. So it kind of was actually, it wasn't coming up with anything useful. It was coming up with a "tell me what to do" kind of prompt. So that kind of it makes you think about programming right away. Um, and then the other thing was, it really couldn't do very much. Like the first ones, the Apple II didn't even have lowercase letters on it. It was just all uppercase letters, and the graphics were just big blocks, like, not even pixels, just big, like the high resolution mode was beyond me at first. But like, so there were a lot of games and things that were done then you could look at it and you'd be like, oh yes, I could make that game. And so there was basically nothing that that computer could do that one talented, elementary school kid really, like, with enough time and energy, you could make it do those same things. And so that was really powerful. Whereas if you get a computer today and boot it up, hopefully you get one running Fedora, boots up into Fedora. You look at that and there's all this stuff, like, you couldn't necessarily replicate what it does. And then if you go to play a game, some sort of even Minecraft, but first person shooter, the AAA games, like, those are produced with budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars. They're like Hollywood production movies, right? And so, like, one person can't possibly do that. So I feel like the time I started, it felt easy to get into it because it felt like I could do this. And I can talk more about that that later. But I think now it's a little more intimidating just because there's so much polish around everything, and computers are almost taken for granted in what they can do. And then when you actually go to do it, turns out you've got to learn a lot of the basics first. Uh, but I was just there. The basics were all there were.
Yeah, and it takes more than 5 minutes to learn everything you need to know these days to be able to really
Yeah,
do something. Yeah.
certainly.
Talking a little bit more about the school, and so you went through high school. I'm assuming you eventually got to university. What did you go for university, and can you tell us a little bit about that and what kind of
Yeah,
course you took?
I can, which is so I went to public elementary school, then a little private Christian high school, which was not a very good school, but that was okay. Then I went on to college, and uh, so I have ADHD, and I was at that point in my life, I was young and I was really struggling with it, and I didn't know how to manage things. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I actually was going to not go into computers as a career because they were my fun thing to do, and I wanted to do something, science or writing, or I had no idea, very scattered. And I ended up taking a couple classes that I really liked, and then some classes that were like the boring general education classes you were supposed to take. And again, this was dumb. I do not advise this. I did not go to my classes that were boring, and I ended up getting 2 A's and 2 F's my first semester college, um, and eventually it just wasn't working out for me. And I've been working at the computer center there, and one of my friends just graduated, and in where we were in the Midwest at the time, there weren't internet providers around. So he just graduated from college and discovered that he didn't have access to the internet anymore because where was he going to get it from? He'd been getting it from college. Then he was like, I'm going to start an ISP. So he convinced his father to start an internet service provider there in the rural area we were. And he said, why don't you come work for us and do that? And so college wasn't working out for me. There was this opportunity, and I took it to do that. So I dropped out and helped my friend build this ISP. We did that together. And it started out, we built it using Windows NT because that's what we knew, and that wasn't working very well. It was crashing and causing us a lot of maintenance and all sorts of problems. So we'd heard of this Linux thing. So I ordered some Linux CDs from the internet, or from like a mail order thing. Where I don't, I got it. I think I got it through the college internet. Right? But we ordered these and had a stack of different Linux distributions, Debian, Red Hat, and whatever. And ended up installing Slackware and running the ISP off of Slackware, and then after a little while, changing that to Red Hat Linux. That's how we kind of got started with Linux. It turned out to be much, much better than for building an internet provider than Windows was.
I think Slackware was the entry point for many back then as well, right? So I remember getting my CDs from Walnut Creek. I think it was the name of
Yeah,
the company. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think mine was the Info Magic set. That was it. Um, yeah, Slackware is great, but especially at the time, like, basically, it didn't have the idea of upgrading in any ways. Not even just from one release to another, but like keeping your packages on your system up to date was a very manual process. So, Red Hat had RPM and it promised slick upgrade from one to the other, and back then it actually wasn't quite so slick, but these days at Red Hat, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and Fedora, we actually do have it, so upgrades are very nice and smooth. But that was really the selling point that got me to move from Slackware to something else back in the time. And I basically stayed in the Red Hat world of things ever since.
So you got into the helping working with your friend there to set up an ISP, and how did your career evolve from there? Where did you go after?
Yeah. So we set up this little ISP, and it was fun. I learned a lot, and I was young, unmarried, and we probably put in lots of 100-hour weeks, stayed overnight getting things set up. It was very fun. I recommend that some point in your career when you're in your early 20s. It's a fun way to work, but it is obviously not sustainable. You should not do that for your whole career, but it was really fun at the time. And then actually, my friend helped me out again. He moved to Boston. We live in the Boston area now, 20 something years later. His girlfriend was coming out here for school, and so he got a job at Boston University and said, "Hey, I can help you get a job here with what you know." So he helped me get a job at Boston University. And then, so that was in the IT department there, supporting Unix systems, IRIX, Solaris, digital, like the proprietary Unix systems. And actually, my first job, there's a system called VAX VMS, and so that was a 1970s competitor to 1980s competitor to Unix. Basically, it has some cool things, but it basically lost out. And so there were still some of these systems running at the university. And so my first job there was to try and convert these, move everybody from these systems that were so old and so out of date and not supported and maintained in anything to Solaris Unix systems, which was technically not a particularly hard thing to do, but it was, again, I was young. It was a very interesting learning experience because it turned out to not be a technical problem at all. It was a social problem because you had professors who had been using this for their email and using this for the system for, since the 80s, and like that, a degree of change coming from this young, uh, looks like a student kid trying to tell them they need to change their computing habits. Wow, that was a very learning experience about what's important in how to do things, technology versus people. So that first assignment eventually got done, but didn't go very well. But figured it out. But meanwhile, another interesting thing was going on, which was at at the time, Linux was rising in popularity, and a lot of different departments would have a grad student or somebody who's doing a website and things for that department, and they would have a server that would basically be a PC running under their desk. Now, the departments could buy these Solaris machines, proprietary Unix machines, and run stuff from there, or buy services from the central IT, but they didn't have any money. So they would get an old PC and shove Linux on it. And what would happen is, on the university network, there was not the security levels on networks that there is today, and Linux itself was just not security ready out of the box. So someone would bring up one of these systems, and then it would get hacked within, half an hour maybe. It was crazy. And so our security team was basically running around telling everybody, "Stop it, you can't run Linux." So I was like, "Well, but I like Linux." So I put together a proposal. One of my other friends worked there, basically for a tightened down version of it that's specifically made for the university network, with the security we needed and access to university resources, because this is open source. We can take it, and we don't have to just consume it as it comes to us. We can improve it and make it fit our needs. So I launched a thing called Boston University Linux Project, and that got support from the vice president of the IT there. And so it was a little successful thing where we had a little team of people making our own little Linux distro. It was based on Red Hat Linux, and then with changes to make it, like I said, tied into our network and with security that it needed. And so I did that for quite a few years, building that and running university infrastructure running on that. And then when one of these departments would have a problem, we wouldn't say, you can't run Linux, we would say, if you want to run Linux, please run our Linux. We'll make it better for you. Not only is it more secure, but we have all these access to the software the university provides, university account systems, all these kind of things. So that's kind of how I got into building Linux distributions, because I saw that need and thought, hey, I could do that, and made it.
Well, it's just amazing, right? That's the beginning of eventually going to work on the Fedora project, right? So you kind of build your own, customize your own distributions there for the user at the university, right? So helping those
Right.
professors that have been used to using whatever email system they're using to being able to move into this new environment. And how did the career evolve from there? Where did you go next?
Yeah, so that was, yeah, a successful thing, but that was also, it was before, before Fedora, before Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and um, when that split happened, we tried to follow Fedora for a little bit, but early Fedora, I was involved with it, but it was still kind of too fast moving for what we needed. So we did Fedora and the desktop, and then CentOS Linux for server stuff. Both of them made into our customized BU Linux version, and did that for a while. But then, as I kept doing this over a course of a decade, Red Enterprise Linux, got really good. This problem of it's insecure out of the box, like people realized, we can't have that. So RHEL itself started having 90% of the capabilities and things that our custom project was doing. So the importance of that work was kind of going down. And then there were some changes at the university, just university politics and so on. So I was able to get a job at Harvard at computing there based on my experience. And I worked at academic computing at Harvard for a little bit. And then again, like Boston University had some politics, but Harvard has next level crazy politics. So that was kind of too much for me, and a job became available working on Fedora at Red Hat, and so I was hired for that to work on Fedora Cloud things, and then shortly after became project leader.
Well, that's amazing. How do you become project leader or something like the Fedora distribution?
Yeah, so I mean, every project has a different process, of course. In the case of Fedora, since Red Hat ultimately owns the trademarks, although Fedora is a community project, the leader is hired by Red Hat. So it is a Red Hat hired role. And so um, basically, I convinced people at Red Hat that I was the right person for this role. And they uh, agreed with me eventually and put me in the position. Yeah, Fedora is kind of a unique project because it is very tightly connected to Red Hat, but we also really value having a non-Red Hat community that has leadership roles in the project and input into where it goes. And something like 2/3 of the contributors to Fedora and our core community even are non-Red Hatters. So we really value that. It's not something that is just like here's Red Hat's the company and then there's a community on the other side. We are all the community together.
How many versions of Fedora have you pushed out to the door so far?
Oh my goodness. So, well, yeah, so we are working on Fedora Linux 36 now. And I think 21 was the first one under my uh, Fedora project leadershipness. So yeah, 15. That's pretty crazy. Uh,
So looking back at you're telling me that you got your school and you're looking to the Apple computers there that helped you learn some basic programming, and then you go into the ISP business there with your friend. How do you look at Fedora today and the things you can accomplish by using a system like Fedora and the tool set that we have and the open source community that's part of Linux, is part of Fedora and other distributions as well? How do you compare today's learning environment, programming environment, technology environment to the days back then when you're starting at school?
yeah, well, on the one hand, everything is so much easier and more convenient. Like you can buy a system with Fedora Linux pre-installed, or you can install it on your system pretty easily, and it's very likely that things will just work. And you can have be connected to the internet, and you can look up answers for things. You can go to Ask Fedora, get help really easily and quickly. Chat in real time. All those things weren't available. That's pretty amazing. Um, and I guess I've got two completely separate answers to this, so I'm going to do them one at a time. The first one is part of what I learned and really wanted to keep from what I did with Linux is that it's really important to make it so that people can solve their problems. So one of the things we try to do with Fedora as a project is to make it so that if you want to make a variant, you want to be like, I would like to have it but configured this way, we make it easy for you to be part of the Fedora project and make, say, an i3 window manager version of Fedora Linux that kind of fits what your vision for how the operating system should be. And so, somebody who has a university and they want to customize it for their university should be really easy to do that. So we've worked on making that possible. That's not just from my experience. It's one of the things that Fedora has always cared about, that kind of drew me to it and kept me as part of the community as well. That's something that's really nice about Fedora Linux in particular. But there is that other thing of that the system is there's so much to it. It's so beautiful, and all the software is large and complicated and hard to get into. It's not that same experience as coming up to the Apple prompt and typing print statements, and there you go. So it's a little bit hard to feel out where to get involved. So one of the things I think is really important to us in the open source movement in the future is Internet of Things, IoT programming, Raspberry Pi, other little ARM devices where you can build something, you can do a home automation project where you can do something that is, you can make a light controller, you can make a thermostat, you can do the things that are as good or better than the commercial IoT projects that you could get, products you could get, and uh, it's something you can pretty easily learn and tackle yourself, and you can get Arduino things to control, do little other kinds of controllers and sensors and things like that. It's something where you can really be have that same kind of hands-on learning experience where you can build something up that it's, you look at a project you want to do and oh yeah, I could make something that could do that. And so that's one of the areas we've been pretty serious about in Fedora. A lot, first of all, because it's an important area of technology, but also because it has that ability to get involved and just do things and make real things, which I think is so important to learning.
And Matthew, you're talking early in the conversation here about the complexity of migrating professors from the systems that
Yeah.
they had to the new systems, right? So here we're talking about a project like the Fedora project that has millions of users worldwide and thousands of contributors, right? So here you're kind of project managing. You have pushed several different releases out of the door, and you're really working on Fedora 36. Can you tell us a little bit of the complexities associated with dealing so many people and the tools and the communication that goes on, and how do you guys get yourselves organized to be able to have the quality that we see in the product and being able to ship the product to the door to millions of users? And by the way, it's a free product, right? So nobody's really paying for the product. So can you explain how do you get organized?
So yeah, a lot of it is very much self-organizing, and it's not that this isn't the kind of role where I can tell anybody what to do. Everybody is volunteers, and even Red Hatters who are working on this project, none of them report to me. They have their own things that they need to do for their job, and so keeping that all into a cohesive thing is basically my role. And a lot of things work where people know each other. They work on their teams. There's a QA team that works on quality assurance, release engineering, translations, all these different areas, and each one has their own way of communicating and their own meetings and things. And so trying to bring that together into a unified structure has been part of what I've done over the past few years as Fedora project leader. Like, we didn't really used to even have an organizational chart where you could kind of see where all these things fit together. It just sort of grew as the project grew larger and larger. And in a lot of ways, it's self-organizing. People people always do what they want to do. So you just kind of need to look at what people are doing and find ways to sort of build a little structure around it, build some frameworks so new people can plug in and see where they need to go, and make sure people are communicating and talking. So a lot of my emphasis is on our communications tools. We use a lot of IRC, that's Internet Relay Chat, a very ancient internet protocol for instant messaging, basically. And we've recently built a matrix-based system, chat.fedoraproject.org, which is a little more of a modern take on, again, that instant messaging for communication that bridges to that old IRC network. So that's still there, and still many people still love that and will still use it. I guess that's maybe something I did learn from that. Trying to move people from the old system to the new, like, people have reasons they want to stay on the thing that they care about. Usually there are upsides and downsides to the new thing, so people are we kind of have to make any migration process smooth as possible and let people stay where they are if they can. So we have a bridge technology to this new modern chat app with a web interface and emojis, and send pictures and so on through it, and trying to get everybody kind of organized into one space there. And then, of course, our other large mailing discussions are on mailing lists. And we've launched a discussion.fedoraproject.org discussion forum, which is again kind of a more modern take than a mailing list. It has a lot of the same functionality as a mailing list, but also brings new things to the table. And I'm kind of working very slowly, I guess, on getting a lot of the project moved to use that discussion forum instead of mailing lists, just kind of to bring things together into one much more visible central place that's easier for people to plug into and connect, and to keep kind of the teams next to each other and talking to each other about everything. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It's a huge exercise. I think the code of conduct is also something very important for the community, right? Because it kind of sets the rules for respect and collaboration as well. Correct?
Yeah, and Fedora has been a leader in code of conduct um, things, really, where we used to, when the project started out, we kind of felt like, well, we shouldn't need that. We should all be good. And so eventually the first code of conduct just said, be excellent to each other. And so it turned out that that didn't work very well. Everybody had different interpretations of what that meant, and there was no enforcement. So we wrote a slightly more specific and stronger one, and then have recently updated that to be a little more comprehensive with specific processes and so on, just so that everybody is on the same page, and to make a place where people feel like it's a safe place to be and to participate, and people can talk about Fedora. Other things won't get in their way. You don't, people aren't mistreating each other. And hopefully we don't have very many things that actually rise to code of conduct, kind of reports or issues or things like that. Unfortunately, those things do happen. But we kind of try to keep an overall tone where that basic be excellent to each other thing is there all the time, and hopefully that helps. But yeah, we want to be a place where everybody's respected and welcome, and we know we are following just basically a professional means of interacting with each other.
And Matthew, you're dealing with piles of technology and a huge project, complex project with so many different components and so many people involved, right? Is there anything technology related today that you don't necessarily use, but you'd like to use in the future and play with that, work with that at some point in time?
Oh, well, I was talking about the IoT stuff. I definitely would like to do more with that, more with robotics and things like that. I think that would be really fun. I don't have a lot of time for that, but I find that interesting. And I guess also I came to this job at Red Hat from that professional sysadmin experience, working in universities with you know, students, and not gigantic cloud provider scale computing, but real users at real work, large scale, to where I am now, where I actually am talking to people and sometimes some little technical things, but not really. I'm not really a professional technology person in a lot of ways anymore. And so all this stuff with Kubernetes and OpenShift and all the kind of new cloud computing ways of doing things, I know a lot about it in theory, but I haven't really like I've never deployed that to production. I've never had users of that depend on me to use it. And I think it would be I would like to actually do some of that, just kind of see how, the sysadmin profession, the SRE as we say now, right? How that's changed. I think that would be uh, interesting. It's one of those things. All of my learning has been through doing through my whole career. That's how I think that's the best way to learn anything. And so I don't know, probably need some more doing with some of these things in order to really understand them.
Yeah, there's no shortage of interesting things out there, right? So it makes life a little bit more complicated in terms of picking where you want to explore it a bit further.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So look at Fedora. Is there anything special on the distribution that's you'd say like this is my favorite portion, what Fedora does, what Fedora is, or anything in particular at all?
Yeah, I think the people that bring are the community really make Fedora special. We've got this four foundations we say that are our values. They're friends, features, freedom, and first. So friends, I think, is to me the most important one. Although software freedom also very important to what we are. It makes it possible, and it's all about sharing the technology and being innovative first, having cool features, all super important. But I really like Fedora. It really is my friends, and everybody in the project is wonderful. So I think that really makes it what it is. And there's so many other people who put in just so much of their lives into making Fedora work really well. It's not just me in the leadership role. We have other people in the Fedora Council, other people at Red Hat, and community people who help support that leadership role, help set our strategy, and lead within their own teams, and just individual things they're working on. Like all of that, just passion poured into making this thing great. It is what makes it great. It's so many people care about it, and it's a labor of love for so many of us, and that's really what makes Fedora special, I think. Of course, that's true of a lot of things, but this is ours.
Yeah, you mentioned before that there's people who contribute from other distributions as well, right? So I'm assuming you guys are exchange information about what others are doing as well, learning from different what other distributions are doing all the time as well, correct?
Yeah, we try to talk and collaborate. I think FOSDEM coming up is there's a distro dev room where people go. It's a big conference in Europe every year, virtual this year, of course, where we talk back and forth. And yeah, we do try and keep in touch with people at OpenSUSE and Canonical and um, all other distributions about what's going on and how we can work together. Everybody has their own ideas. That's why we have different distributions, of course. But yeah, collaboration like that is very important, definitely.
And what kind of impact did the pandemic have on the kind of work that you do and the folks that put Fedora together doing? How
Yeah,
did that change any way or shape or form the work you guys are doing?
well, yeah. So for me personally, I mostly work for home already. Going into the one of the Red Hat offices 1 day a week before, so I stopped going in 1 day a week. So that wasn't a huge change. Um, but yeah, I was pretty worried that people would be kind of burned out and not have a lot of energy, and we would have some maybe even trouble putting out the release. But it actually turned out that people kind of used the time again to pour a lot of love into the project. So we actually had a lot of interest and excitement and change during the pandemic times. So it's actually I think we've done very well during it. We have a Fedora social hour we started doing so that we can have a connected thing. We have a video call every week where people can join and just kind of talk and chat and hang out in a social setting. We've added that. I think that was a good thing to do. And of course, our events went virtual, and those have been big successes. We have a lot of people. We have a contributor conference normally called Flock to Fedora, where we have a location, usually in the US or in Europe, and we bring people from all around the world together to plan our next release and celebrate and talk to each other and so on. And so we couldn't do that. So we have Nest with Fedora. So you're nesting at home with the virtual conference. So we've done that for the last 2 years. And because it was virtual, we've had, I think, maybe about twice to three times the attendance we had in the physical conference. So it enabled more people to participate, which is a good thing. I definitely miss the in-person connections. I hope we can get back to that as well. But I think we are going to try and keep some more virtual components to conferences as well in the future.
Yeah, I think we all miss the physical kind of interactions and going to conferences, and certainly something that I miss, and I think everybody misses as well, right? And looking back through your career and thinking about the listeners here for the podcast, they're most in Brazil. And what kind of a recommendation you have to those who are, they're still young, they're kind of trying to figure out if technology or programming or something similar is for them, and there's lots of questions and lots of uncertainties that these guys are going through, right? What would you recommend to them? What would you tell them?
So yeah, I think, like I said, the best way to learn things is by doing. So, you know, put put Linux on a system. I recommend Fedora Linux, obviously, and play with it, see what you like, and don't be afraid to break things. This is also one of the things I learned early on, where if if there's something on a computer that goes wrong and uh, there's really nothing you can break that you can't figure out how to fix at some point in software. Now, hardware is a whole other problem. I stay away from hardware. I'm always afraid I'm going to break it forever. But in software, like, you can always repair it. Make sure you've got backups of anything important, but you can't mess up your own system so much that you can't fix it again at some point. So don't be afraid to break your system. Play with it and learn from there, and then kind of see if you enjoy it, and if you enjoy it, it might be a thing for you. And it definitely is a good way that you could develop skills that are valuable worldwide in the worldwide market. Especially, I think that's a thing that's changing quite a bit with COVID, where people working remotely have a lot of opportunities that maybe they didn't have before, because companies are open up to that remote work that they weren't previously. Um, I do think getting involved with an open source project is good. Obviously, you don't always have a lot of free time for that, but just the connections you make with people and the things you can learn, again, by doing something that's real. You're actually working on something that's more than just a toy project. It's not just a little thing that's you're doing for yourself, but you're doing something for other people, for other real users, and it can really learn just a lot very quickly that way. And just helping out in the project can really help you learn. And another important thing there is, even if you're not already a good programmer, or even if programming isn't where you exactly where you want to go with technology, all of these open source projects, Fedora, but everything else, always needs people with skills that are beyond just programming. We need people who can talk to other people about it. We need people who can write. We need people who can do translations. We need people who can draw. We need people who can run a meeting. We need people who can stay organized. A lot of programmers aren't very organized. So, having those kind of skills, marketing skills, podcasting skills, every project needs all of those kinds of things. So there's probably something that you can do with skills you already have. So getting involved based on what you can contribute, what you can do, is a good way to get into any open source project. Start writing some documentation, write a blog post, and then if you also want to learn programming, there will be opportunities within that project to work on some programming things, and possibly people who can mentor you and help you learn. But you don't have to come in and learn programming first and then start contributing. You can get involved in the community, and then you can learn at your own pace and grow as you make those relationships and get more involved in the project.
That's great recommendation there. So thank you. And Matthew, I noticed that you do some photography. Is it a hobby, a passion, or what's that?
Yeah, it's a hobby and a passion. Yeah, absolutely. I haven't COVID's been really bad for that. But yeah, I've got two kids, and so I got a camera to take their picture, and found out that I enjoyed taking photographs more than just taking snapshots of my kids. So I do love to take pictures of people and city kind of things, cityscapes, um, and uh, but I haven't really been able to get out and do very much of that. And my kids now are teenagers, and they're like, "Stop taking my picture, Dad!" So no more of the automatic free models for me to work with. So I don't know. Post COVID, and we'll see. I think maybe someday when I retire, if photography as a uh, avocation post retirement sounds like a lovely thing to do. Whatever, another 40 years from now.
Yeah, it does sound great. And hopefully the kids are not asking you to drop them off away from school. Anyway, I know how it is. Matthew, in terms of talking about recommendations again, do you have any books or music or movies or anything you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh wow. Well, I'm a big Neil Stevens fan. I just restarted reading his latest Termination Shock. It's pretty good. I'd recommend that. I'm not done with it yet, so I can't make a full recommendation. But I think that's a lovely book to read. It's a technology adjacent sci-fi where you're not learning about Linux directly from it, but reading the fiction kind of about technology in the world is always an interesting thing. I uh, enjoy that. Um, Sorry, I wasn't prepared for this question. I don't have any recommendations really lined up. I watched with my teenage daughter. We watched Dirk Gently's Detective Agency recently, BBC America show. I think I can pretty highly recommend that, especially if you're a Douglas Adams fan. It's pretty weird, but fun. It does not follow the books. It just is kind of inspired by them, but I think it follows the spirit in a way that I appreciated.
That's great. Thank you. And if I am somebody new and I listen to this podcast, I want to get involved with Fedora, what's the best website? Do I go to fedora.org or someone else?
Yeah, it is fedoraproject.org. And there's a join Fedora group, which you can find on chat.fedoraproject.org, or there's a Telegram channel for it, and or just on the discussion at fedoraproject.org site as well. And there's a process kind of for bringing people in with help. If you feel like it's a little bit too intimidating to kind of jump into such a big project, the Join Fedora team is basically ready to help you figure out where you can fit in and what you can do and how to get involved, and kind of give a little bit of guidance and hand holding in the first steps there.
Okay. And I know you mentioned that you work on Fedora 36. Besides Fedora, any plans for the future that you'd be able to share with us?
Well, one of the exciting things, RHEL releases, Red Hat Enterprise Linux releases, come out every 3 years based on Fedora Linux, and so now that's gone into CentOS Stream. So CentOS Stream will then become RHEL 9. So that's kind of in progress. I think that's kind of fun to see all of our community work being made into this enterprise product there as well. That's kind of an interesting process going on kind of next to us for our associated projects. There's a lot of cool stuff going on in Fedora Linux. The Fedora CoreOS and Fedora Silverblue, which is container technology on the desktop, is really neat. We might be looking at doing something on mobile phones finally. I will see about that, but I think that's pretty interesting. And like I said, the IoT, Fedora IoT stuff. It's one of the things I'm actually working on here. I'm going to try and get my house all set up as a smart home with smart light switches and everything all controlled by a Fedora IoT brain in the middle of it.
That's great. Sounds like tons of fun over there. And before we close, any contact information that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, MattDM, MattDM, or basically contact me at a lot of places with that email or that handle. Um, mattdm at fedoraproject.org, mattdm.org as my website, and so on. And of course, there's at Fedora at Twitter. That's good to follow as well for Fedora Linux in general.
So that's great. So I just want to take a minute here to thank you for taking time to speak with me today. It's a Sunday, and it's almost I think 1 p.m. your time in the East Coast. So I greatly appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and I look forward to Fedora 36 and beyond.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed speaking with you. I was very glad to be here.
Chegamos ao final de mais um episódio. Agradeço a todos a atenção e o nosso site é OsProgramadores.com. Participem e até o próximo episódio. Um bom dia para todos.